Before we get into the show, a quick reminder to check out and subscribe to the Beer Edge podcast with Andy Crouch. Each week, he's doing deep dives into breweries, talking with journalists covering the beer space, and unpacking a lot of what makes the beer industry so interesting. Find the Beer Edge podcast wherever you download shows. Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. This week, I'm taking a trip down memory lane with VanderKamp. He's a founder and now CEO of New Holland Brewing Company, as we talk about the loss of the brewery's IPA, the rise of its stout, the intersection of beer and politics, and the importance of water. We're going to get into the show in just a moment, but first, Jack Hendler of Jack's Abbey is joining me on the line, and the brewery is a sponsor of this episode, so thank you to them. And we're talking about the brewery's Lager of the World series, and the third version has just been released. And this time, the brewery is headed to Japan. So, Jack, welcome. And what can you tell us about this beer?
This beer is a collaboration with Baird Brewing in Japan, and we were able to partner with them to really bring a really interesting beer with a lot of Japanese influence back here to Framingham.
Like, what is the Japanese influence?
So we used a whole bunch of ingredients, and again, some really hard things to find. That was a real struggle, particularly during this pandemic. But one of the interesting ingredients we used was yuzu, and we've also used green tea. We used rice, and we also used Sriracha Ace hops.
And how does it all finish out? What are the specs on this beer?
Because of the rice has a somewhat light, dry finish, but it has a really fresh, citrusy note from the yuzu, the green tea, and the Sriracha Ace hops that we used as a dry hop.
How much of this are you drinking right now?
It's sort of perfect timing. It's still a little bit warm out, and you get that sort of nice, refreshing citrus note and a not too heavy style of beer. So it's sort of a really nice end of summer beer, perfect for this time of year.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Jack. And you're going to be back with us at the bottom of the show to talk more about this beer. But in the meantime, I'm going to encourage folks to visit jacksabbey.com to learn more about the Lagers of the World program, as well as the brewery. This episode is also sponsored by NZ Hops. In a little country far down in the Pacific, you'll find a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. Years of partnership with a dedicated hop breeding program and farming knowledge handed down through the generations sees the current day master growers proudly providing 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz or find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at NZ Hops Ltd to learn more. And we're also brought to you by Briess, the leading supplier of specialty malt to craft brewers. They offer the broadest product line in the industry, including a wide range of roasted malts that add flavor, color, and character to beer. Their experienced operators handcraft every batch of roasted malt to ensure the product you get is consistent. Check out brewingwithbriess.com for beer recipes using roasted malt. I've been thinking a lot about entrepreneurship lately, especially following last week's conversation with Phil Wymore. And so while I was preparing for the show this week with VanderKamp of New Holland, I was thinking about the brewery's early days and that desire to create something out of nothing and to take risks and to learn along the way. The brewery was founded in 1996, and over the years, it's evolved from a small brewpub to one of the country's largest craft brewers, mostly on the back of a bourbon barrel imperial stout, which is a pretty amazing feat. VanderKamp says he's learned a lot along the way, some good, some bad, and has tried to use the brewery as a platform or a vehicle for good in and around the community where it's based, as well as in Michigan. He also used the platform of the brewery to run for state office a decade ago. He lost, but learned some lessons from that as well. In this wide-ranging conversation about business and passion, mistakes and successes, I wanted to start at the beginning, going back to those early days and what got the business rolling in the first place. Here's our conversation. When you think back now to before New Holland opened up, when it became the idea that you wanted to open a brewery, everything starts off as an idea, but then there needs to be some sort of impetus or an actionable item or something that takes it from being a dream into the first step of it actually becoming a reality. When you think back to the early days before New Holland opened up, what do you think it was that encouraged you to move from just this would be a cool thing to do, this would be a fun venture, to, okay, we've just taken the first step to actually becoming a physical entity?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And it's one that, I tell the story, the stories become something of, you tell it enough time and it becomes lore. But, I can really tell you that, I was a geology major here in the same town at Hope College, which is in the same town where I started the brewery here in Holland, Michigan. And I graduated with a environmental emphasis, specifically a groundwater hydrology emphasis in my geology degree. And, that was something that I had kind of fallen into my early years of college. I was a terrible student, was very dispassionate about studying and was very passionate about socializing and beer drinking in college. But I kind of stumbled into this geology based on something my advisor mentioned to me that said, you might like this. The earth sciences were something I enjoyed in junior high and high school. And why don't you check this out? And lo and behold, I did love it. I love I love the pieces of the puzzle, how they all fit together. And the processes that you see today working on the earth are the same processes that happened, millions of years ago. And yeah. I could put that together I could vision that and put that together. And so it was something I had fallen into, and I did quite well in my studies in geology. It was something that, upon graduating, it was where I was able to marry that idea of my scholastic passions with wanting to move out west. And I moved out to Boulder, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And of course, at that time, craft beer was this was 94, 95, and it was just booming out there. And it was all we really, when we'd go out to the bars, that's what we would drink. It was what all the kids my age were drinking at the time. Not all, but it was really becoming quite popular. And before that, it was something more on a niche. You had, here in Michigan, we had Bell's, but that was more, it wasn't so mainstream. And I really saw kind of like, holy shit, you could really make a business of this out there. And it also didn't hurt that I was just, quite honestly, I was miserable working for someone else and doing what I thought I was going to do for the rest of my life, which was, I ended up working up in the Front Range right outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. And I was just doing basic, some surveying work and some hydrology work around septic system design. And it was not fulfilling. And I saw this enthusiasm and excitement that was going on around this craft beer movement at the time. And my longtime friend from high school and college, who I started the company with, came out to visit me, and we were like, why the hell aren't we doing what we love to do? And
who is the friend?
Jason Spalding. I'm sorry, Jason Spalding. Who now he and his wife own a brewery in Grand Rapids called Brewery Vivant. Yeah, and we just could not come up with any real reason other than we didn't know what the hell we were doing to start a business and a brewery. And it was that. It was this moment that we had several beers at Old Chicago right down on the main street in Boulder. And we just said, F it, we got to do this. And it was that moment. It just became very crystal clear. I was just so unfulfilled with the work that I was doing and there was such a need and to be part of something that was going to be, that we could vision that was needed and was going to be big, I packed up my Volkswagen Golf. I literally gave my 2 weeks notice the next day and packed up my Volkswagen Golf, drove it back to Michigan, and kind of at that point, I burned the ships behind us and said, "This is it. We're going to go for it." And so that was it. And I suppose in hindsight, I don't mean to make light of it, but we didn't have a lot of assets. We didn't have, neither of us were married or had a serious girlfriends. And so we didn't have a lot tying us down. But it was a big risk now in hindsight, looking back at it. But man, I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. When you were originally thinking of it, though, because some of the breweries that I imagine you saw in Boulder or in Colorado were smaller or neighborhoodish. You mentioned Bell's being, more mainstream. What was the original plan for the brewery for New Holland versus, squaring with what it is now? Because, I'd argue that you have a pretty mainstream brewery.
Yeah, well, back, the original plan was very modest. It called for, I think we were trying to, build a brew house and brewery that could, produce about 500 to 1,000 barrels of beer a year. It was much more, compared to the plan that ultimately came out, it was much more restaurant focused, brew pub, like a classic American brew pub. Brewery brew pub. And, out of necessity, we had to alter that plan because we truly, Jason or myself, I don't think we had one business course between us in our college. Neither of our parents were business. His dad and mom were educators, and my parents were big company folks at Dow Chemical. That's, we were both from Midland. So, we didn't have a lick of business between us. So it was really, the banks kind of came in and said, "Hey, restaurants are super risky." They just classified it as that. But this brewery thing, there's something there with this brewery side on the manufacturing side. So we altered our business plan quite significantly, and we became much more, I guess what I look at the breweries that are starting today. We're a larger version of what some of these breweries that start today with a tasting room only attached to them. The difference was this back then, as opposed to now, we started with a 25 barrel brew house.
Sure.
And so we were brewing 1,000 gallons at a time, whereas now you would get a 3 barrel brew house, or which seems to be typical, or a 1 barrel brew house, and you'd brew all the time and you keep a variety of beers on. We did not, that wasn't the model back then. We had about 2 beers on when we started. But it was very much a craft brewery model today in terms of in a garage and just beer.
You've been doing this for long enough now, and I know you talk to a lot of brewers. There's a lot of people who come through your brewery. There's been people who have come through and launched their own afterwards as well. When you think about places that are opening today that are starting off with the 3 barrel system as opposed to a 25, does that make you twitchy? Are you envious? Because there's obviously, everybody's going to do their own thing and have their own, their own path forward. But so many of the folks that I talk to who start off with a, 1, 2, or 3 barrel system very quickly realize that they underestimated how big a system they were going to need, and then have to scramble after their doors are open to get larger stainless in. Do you ever have those conversations with people of think about bigger first?
Yeah. And I don't know where the sweet spot would be in this, because I do, there was a brewery that literally opened up 2 doors down from us. And I remember they put a 3 barrel in the, and they it was a smart move on their part, quite honestly. They fill a different niche than we do, and they've been successful in filling that niche, and we're friendly with them and get along with them. But they put a 3 barrel system in their basement, and I just remember thinking to myself, my goodness, this is going to be a pain in the ass for you guys. You guys are going to be hustling But what the beauty of the 3-barrel is, and it's not rocket science here, but you get a wide variety of beers that you can put on tap right away. Yes, you're brewing your ass off all the time, but the consumer gets to, that's what the consumer wants. They want the variety. Whereas where we had the advantage of the consumer, it was a different time. 25 years ago was totally different in the arc of craft beer. Really, Jason and I did everything. We worked the bar when we were open at night. I brewed every batch of beer for the first 5 years of our company. Jason was out doing sales during the day. So, the 25-barrel brewery afforded us the luxury of, brewing basically what amounted to once or twice a week, and then being able to go run the other areas of the business. Now, you couldn't do that anymore. You couldn't start a brewery with 2 beers on tap. I mean, you'd be like, the expectation of the consumer is just totally different. So it is it's different. I think the one part, and I think maybe these days you probably have a better, your finger on it better than I even do, is that, it was amazing there for a while when these folks would start these breweries with, call it 3 to 5 barrel systems. And all of a sudden they're having to go to 10 to 15 barrel and they're cranking out 5,000 barrels of beer seamlessly. Like, it almost seemed without any effort, because the market was so ready for that. Yeah. And I think it was very, we're up 50,000 barrels of beer, and we've been at this for 25 years. And I think there's things to be envious about growing that fast. But there's also pitfalls with growing that fast. For us, we've been able to put a lot of the systems in place, and we've been able to methodically grow our business and not blow some people out of the water necessarily within our own organization. We've been able to grow our culture of our organization step by step because of that as well. So
you mentioned, so let's sort of talk about that for a minute, because the culture of the organization of breweries has really been brought up to the forefront over the last couple of months. People have been talking about, some really having some really tough conversations about what's happening inside of their own walls. And in a lot of cases, smaller breweries are learning, the importance of having HR, or learning the importance of having, an employee handbook that clearly spells out, don't be an asshole, treat people well, or, if you say something or do something that is sexist or misogynistic or whatever, like you're out, you're gone. How quickly did you try to establish what you wanted the New Holland culture to be? I mean, if it was just the two of you in the early days, I imagine those are easier conversations than when you start to have 5, 7, 50, 100 plus.
Yeah. I mean, the organization's culture, though, was, certainly was much easier to define and kind of keep your arms around because of the size of just the personnel. But as you grow, and we went from what would have been a 10 to 15 person team to all of a sudden we were employing over 125 people in our, when we moved our pub to our downtown here. That was a seismic shift. But one of the great things, and this was very blessed to have my own father, Steve, worked with us very early on the mission and the vision of our organization, and probably most importantly, the values of our organization. And, we have 6 values that guide us. And, these are more than things that just sit on the wall. When you walk in the door, it's how we hire, it's how we terminate, it's why we terminate if you're not living up to our values. And it's how we do our annual reviews. These values are implemented through it. So, yes, there's the technical HR side of things, which I recognize is important. And the kind of the cover your ass type of thing where it's real. I mean, I don't want to downplay it. It's there for a reason. There's a reason companies have handbooks, but more importantly, you really want your own team members policing based on the mission of the organization and the values of the organization. I mean, the culture within our organization, whether whether you're fitting in or not culturally, because the team will not allow it if you're not living up to it. And I think that's the best thing I can say about our organization is it's self-policing in that regard.
But there also has to be a confidence that the staff has in order to be able to self-police. Because over the last couple of months, I've had, conversations with people saying like, they were saying one thing, the company was saying one thing, but, and it's not your brewery, but other breweries, where, they wanted us to speak out, but we also knew that there would be retribution if we did. But it sounds like you guys have built it from the ground or from the beginning of you wanted people to feel like they could speak up without penalty.
Well, yes. I mean, that's I don't want to sit here and pretend and say we had, New Holland has never had its challenges. I mean, we certainly do. We're human, and we're an organization that's made up of teams and individuals that share varying, different values, different political beliefs, whatever. But I will tell you that at the risk of pissing off some of our brewery friends is, frankly, it starts at the top. And if I'm not living out these values and I'm not encouraging people to speak out, and I'm not backing up a zero, tolerance type scenario, then your company's going to be, you can't ask somebody to do something that you're not going to, live by yourself. It just rings hollow and people won't do it. So for me, I've made mistakes. Absolutely. Hopefully though, my moral compass has kept us, out of the fray on this. I'm not saying that things, I can't categorically say that things I don't know about haven't happened, but by and large, we try and live our values, which is, we care about people, we act with integrity, we lead, we own our shit, we engage. That's the other part. We want to engage in the processes, and we believe in what we're doing. Those are our values.
You brought up something interesting early on, and then you just sort of tied it back into it. But I'm wondering if you can sort of expand on it a little bit. When you were talking about working out in Colorado, you said that you realized that you were miserable working for someone else. And now that you have people working for you, is that something that you're mindful of, that you don't want to be, somebody feels miserable working for? Like, is that something that kind of comes up in your mind ever?
I wrestle with it in terms of wanting to create a great atmosphere for folks. But for me, I think that statement was very much about me as a person. Okay. And I truly believe that, everybody's different, and everybody has a skill set and a passion that we want to unlock. And, here at New Holland. And for me, it was about creating something that I was visioning and that I wanted to, that I felt that the consumer was asking for and the public was asking for, and that we could deliver. And there was very much a void of what I was seeing out in Colorado. There was very much a void of that here in West Michigan at the time. Okay. So my passion was delivering what I thought, would make the community better, that would enrich the individuals' lives that were in West Michigan at the time, back then. Yeah. And so that was a passion that was a fire that was inside of me that wasn't being fulfilled by working for somebody else out in Colorado. And it was something that I ultimately knew that I wasn't going to be happy unless I was able to really, let this fire kind of burn and create something here in Michigan. Now translating to what you're saying is I'm absolutely, supportive of individuals that are working here that want to go out and do their own thing. I recognize that New Holland's not going to be the right place for everybody or, just anybody. But we are looking for people that are entrepreneurial in nature, that do understand, the value of a good day's work and a hard day's work, and why that's so important, right? And then they are rewarded accordingly for that. So it's been a humbling experience, for sure, to have people that want to get behind the vision that we've laid out here, that I've helped really form and create.
Yeah.
It's certainly humbling, and it's something I'm super appreciative of. And I really do love the team members that work hard and work to try and achieve the vision and mission that we've set out.
When you set out, did you have a beer that you hoped the brewery would be known for?
Oh man, we've had many beers that we hoped that the brewery would be known for. I mean, it was, we have, first and foremost, back in the early days, man, we love beer, and we still love beer. It's that goes without saying, but we've been way into, we had one of our first gold medals that we won was with Mad Hatter IPA.
Yeah.
And we thought that beer was, we're going to be known for that beer. And certainly it did have a following. And I think I'll let you kind of lead where you want to take this conversation, but I think it's been remarkable to find Dragon's Milk as the beer that we are known for.
Yeah.
Because it started of such humble beginnings of a creative spark that I had received from a local cider maker that was aging his cider in bourbon casks.
Mm-hmm.
And this beer, Dragon's Milk, started out as a single barrel that we tucked away in the back of our cinder block building back in 1999, and didn't release it till 2000, and started out as in a 53-gallon bourbon cask, and now we have probably 7,000 bourbon casks full of Dragon's Milk aging in our warehouse now. And it's been for very humble beginnings, very mild aspirations, to say the least, about where we thought that beer would go. And it's just organically grown, and it's found a following.
Yeah. I'll have more with Brett in a minute, but first, a word from the folks who help keep the mics hot over here. NZ Hops, a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years to produce some of the world's finest hops. NZ Hops are like no others, unique in their flavors and aromas. Visit nzhops.co.nz to explore more. And Briess is proud to control their malt, starting in the field until it arrives at your brewery. They have a long-term relationship with several hundred growers in the Bighorn Basin of Wyoming and Montana, where warm days, cool nights, and floodwater irrigation yield some of the highest quality barley in the U.S. And check out the latest Lagers of the World beer from Jack's Abbey. This time, it's Destination Japan, a rice lager with yuzu, green tea, and hopped with Sriracha Ace. Learn more at jacksabbey.com. And now, back to Brett VanderKamp of New Holland Brewing. I do want to talk about Dragon's Milk, obviously, but I want to jump back to Mad Hatter, because that was a beer that I remember drinking early on and enjoying it. And then as the shift in IPA palettes started to change in 2013, 14, 15,
yep,
you all kind of blew it up. I remember an article that ran in All About Beer that I edited that really spoke about how you were going to keep the name but totally reformulate the recipe and the pitfalls that could come with that. And if I'm remembering correctly, and I don't have the archives in front of me, but if I'm remembering correctly, you were also trying to talk about it as like a Midwest IPA, trying to gain some ground between West Coast and the then burgeoning New England style. Yeah. And there's a gamble that came with having a beer that people enjoyed, keeping the same name, and then giving them a completely different liquid on the inside. What were those thought processes like, and how did that play out?
Man, this is a fantastic conversation. I'll tell you, because because we wrestled with that, and we got caught up probably taking our eye off of our production eye off the ball, so to speak, in terms of what was happening to the hops that we were using. We probably weren't as diligent on the quality side of the things as we needed to be in terms of, it was predominantly at that time, it was, I think we had some Columbus in the first strike in the kettle. And then it was predominantly Centennial from there on out. And then, heavy Centennial dry hop in the fermenter. And I believe now, hindsight looking at it, is there was just some hop drift. There was some flavor drift in that profile of Centennial. It moved away from the citrus floral characteristics, ended up getting more resiny, almost back to more like a Cascade with the pine quality to it. And we didn't adapt fast enough. And so we felt like we wanted to reimagine that beer. I mean, It was a Mad Hatter, and it was the idea is it's loose, it's a bit crazy, so we can reimagine it. And I remember we tweaked it to kind of compete with the local IPAs here in the Midwest, and we upped the ABV. I think 1.5%. So we were running just over 7% then. And we sourced some different hops that would give it more citrus quality in the dry hop. And it was met early on with some pretty good success, and we saw some interest in it again. And it was close enough to what the original was that it didn't alienate the existing Mad Hatter drinkers as well. They were still on board with it. But over time, with where New England IPAs were going in and the march that they've had westward, there just wasn't a place for Mad Hatter. We have Two Hearted, right. We're an hour away from Kalamazoo.
Yeah.
We're 25 to 30 minutes away from Founders, and we have Goose Island that flanks us around the corner on the lake. So and we got some other great local IPAs that are of more of the New England style.
Yeah.
And so we just looked at the landscape and we realized, outside of our brew pubs, there just isn't a real consumer need for, I hate to say it, but another, more classic American IPA. And tragically, that beer is actually gone away, and we don't even distribute it anymore. And we're actually, we'll bring it back. We'll resurrect it for some reprise at our pubs, but it's no longer in distribution.
And it's amazing how quickly that happened, in like the grand scheme of the brewery's history. Yeah.
I mean, it was our number one brand at a time, and it just shows you how on top, it's like there's lessons there in just how nuanced the market is, and how on top of your quality of the beer, you have to be in terms of paying attention. It's, taste panels are now an active, we are on taste panels all the time and being very critical on our taste panels, blind tasting them up against competition, because, you do get this drift that occurs and you become a bit complacent perhaps. And it can go very quickly. That is for sure. And, it had its time and its place, and it's not, I don't lose sleep over it. Although I do, my wife, it was her favorite beer, all seriousness, and yeah. she doesn't let me forget about it at all, that we took away her favorite beer. But so that hits home quite literally.
But I mean, ultimately it comes down to, and it's interesting because when you started, and when I think back to when I first started writing about beer, passion kept coming up over and over again, and, people were saying, oh, we're not doing it for the money, or, Founders up the road used to have their tagline of, like, we drink all that we want and then we sell the rest, which was always bullshit. But like, it had this nice, thing about it where it's, it's not about passion. It's about, or it's not about business. It's about passion. The reality is if you have a lot of employees, if you want to keep the roof over your head, if you want to keep things going, money needs to come in. The fact that you guys now have a bourbon barrel stout with multiple iterations, that's available across the country. I mean, that's keeping the lights on, and growing the business. Are you surprised by that sometimes?
Absolutely.
That's the beer?
Oh, totally. I am. I mean,
or the brand. Yeah,
it's the brand, it's the beer, it's absolutely remarkable. And I would say that that I think your first leading question, your question that got us on this path was, I could never have imagined when I brewed the first barrel of it, literally brewed a small a barrel and a half of it on a small kettle that we had, that it would become what it has. The best, laid strategy could have never, you couldn't have seen it. You could not have seen it because, what was at the time, it was, I don't know if it was, I don't even know what barrel-aged beer bourbon barrel-aged beer would have been before it. Honestly, I really don't. It was 20 plus years ago that this beer came out, and I don't think you could have foreseen it. It's quite a phenomenal, it's the number. I don't know. It's a remarkable thing that has happened, and it's all been driven from the consumer's pull on this product, because it's very difficult to get a program like this up and going without strong, consistent consumer pull. You can't do a lot of push with it because of the way it ages, right? I mean, we have to age this for about 100 days in a bourbon cask, and it's too much of a risk to put all that cash in and then just do a huge push, because you really have to follow the pull, and it takes a ton of planning through the wholesaler and your retail partners. So it's phenomenal. It's it just is. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, sorry. I was going to say the pull of the end user, of the consumer, because the thing about the beer that I've always been struck with is it can be a weeknight barrel-aged stout.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of the others that are out there. I mean, Goose Island, which is, also they're climbing about 25 years old now, I think, this year with their Bourbon County. But there are a lot of other bourbon barrel-aged stouts that are out there these days, but that are released as, anniversaries or, one-offs or specials or things like that. I mean, 7,000 barrels or 7,000 casks, is an incredible number. And that's a really robust program. But by and large, craft drinkers have come to expect bourbon barrel-aged stouts or whatever as special occasion bottles, weekends, special events, that kind of thing. The fact that you guys have this in 12-ounce bottles and have positioned it as it's Tuesday night, why not have one of these? How did that develop? Was there trial and error with that? Was there?
Well, I think there was some trial and error, but there was also some happy circumstance. We brew the beer, I hope maybe most of your consumers are familiar with Dragon's Milk. It is, it's 11%. It's not by any, it's a serious beer. I mean, and you're a serious beer, or flavor, maybe is a better way. You're a serious flavor lover if you're going to consume, and appreciate Dragon's Milk on it. But you are correct, where we are able to get the flavor profile to a point that leaves you looking for another sip, and it doesn't linger, and you don't have to kind of chew your way through it. And that was very intentional. That's always been very intentional about Dragon's Milk. And I think we have a very clever and proprietary way that we go about making it that ensures that we're able to do that. But the branding, everything from the branding and how we position it to kind of this everyday luxury is very intentional as well. We don't want to, I'll say it, we don't want to be, you're not worthy branding on this.
Okay.
We don't want to be brewed for us branding on this. This is what we want this to be, your everyday luxury. And we want it to be very approachable and special at the same time.
So it starts off with an original, stout in bourbon barrels, and now there's a whole bunch of different variations on Dragon's Milk. There's the white stout. I just had I was drinking a Solera version recently as well. Line extensions are not something that craft has had a ton of success with. The bigger players have done it for a long time, and they have the luxury of, cutting something loose, pretty quick, if it doesn't work out. And I think about, when Sierra Nevada tried their line extensions on Pale Ale and Torpedo a couple of years ago, and people were just kind of confused by it.
Right.
Because there is such craft loyalty to a singular brand. When you're thinking about line extensions or other things that are in or carrying the Dragon's Milk name, is there a lot more left behind that actually gets out than actually gets out into the world? Or is your brewing team sort of dialed into what makes, a good Dragon's Milk a good Dragon's Milk?
Well, so I think if I could answer that by going back, I think we've had some misses. I want to be vulnerable for a moment here and say we haven't done it perfect, and we've had some misses. And I think we're constantly, we get at times we get the same temptations of everyone that, you made a comment earlier, like, yeah, you get to a certain size, and, we have a lot of people that work for us, and their livelihood depends on the success and growth of our organization, and in a very real way. And I take that very seriously, and want to make sure that we're continuing to leverage the assets that we have to benefit our team members and yet the market at large, the consumers that are asking for these items. And sometimes they're asking for them in different ways, and we want to provide something that maybe they haven't thought about. But we've had some misses, and I think we constantly we want to fail quickly. If we do bring something out and it doesn't work, we want to maybe trial it in certain markets and not go nationwide with it. And we want to continue to, again, I think where we learned with Mad Hatter is we want to continue to tweak and not be afraid to make the small tweak now rather than having to eliminate a brand later. So, there are things that we're working on behind the scenes that we see maybe where we have not lived out the brand ethos of Dragon's Milk to the best that we could have, and we've pivoted. Certain ones were maybe some flavor variations that we had on some Dragon's Milk a few years ago that, we were trying to maybe move that brand in a space that we shouldn't have been trying to put it in. And
what's a good example of that?
Oh, we had an orange flavored Dragon's Milk once that we were thinking in terms of, hey, bourbon, old
making
fashioned.
an old fashioned, yeah.
Yeah, we were trying, and it just, to try and get an orange flavor in there, we were using some natural essence of it, and we realized, that's not Dragon's Milk. We're not going to do that anymore, because after we did it, we weren't happy with the result, and we heard feedback from our consumers that they weren't happy with the results of it. And now, again, these were not a lot, these variants there's not a ton of volume, so it's not like we're getting long on product here, but at the same time, we want to listen carefully and pivot where we need to pivot, and also live out the brand ethos. And for Dragon's Milk, this is a term of, we really take the heritage of the term Dragon's Milk very seriously, and it's a name that first appears in written form all the way back in the 1500s, and the very I think Germanic, English Germanic, when those languages were evolving, it appears, and it's always been this very special elixir that has been a term that's been used throughout the ages, and we take that very seriously, and we want to live out that. And so if it's not super special, if it's not special, we are starting to realize we got to start taking better care of the overall term and the history to make sure that what we are delivering isn't some sort of, bastardized version of what Dragon's Milk is, but it's really something special. And so I don't think that limits it. I just think it puts up guardrails around what we can do with the term Dragon's Milk. And I do think you're right. There have been brands that have not done well in terms of maybe executing and messaging to the consumer what that brand represents. But so we need to do a better job. And we're starting to take our cues from maybe look at the Scotch world. The great example was Johnny Walker and the variants that Johnny Walker's been able to have.
Mm-hmm.
And so we start to look at something with that history and the way that how successful they've been, and can we model that with Dragon's Milk?
Yeah.
So, Dan, I don't know if I answered your question there, but it is, our brewers are behind the scenes constantly working on innovation, and our brand manager for, who lives out Dragon's Milk every single day is bringing ideas to the table, and we wrestle with those ideas, and we want to continue to grow Dragon's Milk as a brand family. And, but I think we need to keep the integrity of what that brand represents. And that's a challenge for us.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Cause I imagine there's gotta be like knee jerks of like, well, yeah, let's just put Citra and Mosaic in it and see what happens. And,
yeah. And all of a sudden you have a Dragon's Milk IPA, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
exactly. And, and then it's easier to go home at night. There's so much more that I want to talk to you about, and I'm mindful of time, but
that's okay. Go for it. I'm good.
All right. So a couple of years ago, you ran for state office in Michigan.
Yeah,
twice.
It was actually I ran for state senate here in Michigan, and that was actually 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, believe it or not. But yeah.
Okay. But I found that interesting at the time, and I've sort of filed it away because there have been a number of brewery owners over the years who have made runs for political office. And sometimes it's, a community thing, or it's because, breweries have become these gathering hubs where ideas are exchanged. And it's not unlike the founding fathers of, revolutions being plotted in taverns and that kind of thing. But I'm wondering of somebody who is, involved in politics enough where you wanted to put your hat in the ring in the democratic process, where the relationship between politics and breweries in today's US lives.
Wow. It's a very, I would caution anybody thinking about it to really think through, hindsight being what it was. Now, this is to remember, this was been 2010.
Yeah.
When the campaign really heated up for me, and I started campaigning probably a year earlier, and so these were different times than even a decade. It was over a decade ago.
Yeah.
And now it's become even more polarizing. But I will tell you, it was a very. I don't think our organization was prepared for it, and I kind of blindsided our organization by doing it. Because clearly not everybody in my organization shares my political beliefs, and that caused it some tension and some conflict. How could they potentially, why are they working in an organization where the founder and leader believes a certain way, and I don't believe that? And, this was on a state level. So you can imagine going, getting into federal issues and whatnot,
sure.
how much more complicated that could be. But I think so I guess I should finish my thought there, is that, I would just exercise caution in today's climate of polarization, because people will there's not a ton of critical thinking that happens today in terms of when people hear that what letter you have behind your name, regardless of what type of person you are, there is an immediate belief structure that's placed on you, or, you're branded, and it's actually quite scary, but it's you start to think that person and how they behave, and I found it to be a overall positive experience for me as a person, because it helped define me and made me crystallize my beliefs more, especially when there was a lot on the state level. There's a ton of going door to door and talking to your community.
Yeah.
And I do think the overall net benefit was positive for our business, because it put our name out there more. But I will tell you, it would not be something that I would do again. I had this more idyllic version, I think, of what you were talking about, is like, hey man, the revolutions are fought in the tasting rooms. Let's have these conversations. We need to have these conversations. I mean, I don't mind sharing here that I am a small L libertarian. I believe in, my philosophy is less government, better. And I'm for individual rights and property rights and whatnot. But I was not even, I'm not even a hard R or D. And it is a difficult thing in today's soundbite world to try and describe your position when you are not fully aligned with an R or a D. I will say that as well. So it takes more than you got to have that secondary conversation to really drill deeper. And most people don't want that. They don't want to
have the conversation, right?
No, they don't.
Yeah.
And it's quite frustrating on that, but what I've realized out of all of it is, and this may be something that can help unite, is I firmly believe that the solutions that we all seek will not be solved through politics. It will not happen. It cannot happen. It's too polarized. The system's too corrupt. And I don't mean that like from a conspiracy standpoint. It's just the entire apparatus, the way it's built, it's designed for two parties, and it's designed to, it's to simplify the choices for the public. You're either a red or you're blue.
Yeah.
And you have to fall into one of those two, and you can't have any type of serious conversation or debate, because otherwise you're against the other, you're against me. So I don't know where the solution. I don't know where the solutions come from, but I do know where they're not going to come from, because it's not possible.
Do you find I spent a lot of time on the road in 2016, and I was at a lot of different breweries all throughout the country. And what I found, especially in the run up to the election that year, was people from, if you were red or blue or R or D or whatever, beer was the uniter, and that you could have people sitting next to each other at the bar, and there was tense, if not polite conversation, or polite-ish conversation that was sort of happening in the run up to the election. And then certainly after the election, there was no politeness left. And I think it's probably gotten harder from that. And, the pandemic in 2020, I think prevented a lot of those conversations from happening. But do you think that breweries or tap rooms or bars, can actually still be a neutral ground for people, or has so much shifted with political discourse that even, a mutual love of hops or imperial stouts or whatever isn't enough?
This is a really tough question for me, because part of the spirit and the spark that wanted us to start a brewery was about bringing people together And we truly felt that bringing people together can happen so effortlessly over a beverage, like this great beverage of beer. And you're right. I think that you can't, I think your observation is correct. In 2016, pre-16, I think there was this tolerance and inquisitive aspect of people that would maybe want to learn a little bit more about each other. But, in today's world where you can go online and you can meet so many similarly like-minded people, you don't have to come out of your preconceived or your built up framework and how you see the world.
Yeah.
You just can go and you're there and you're with very like-minded people and you don't have to challenge yourself. And because you can get that connection that you seek, and you feel like, oh yeah, he's a buddy of mine and he feels this, you don't have to go and reach across. I'll use the cliche, reach across the aisle and talk to somebody that maybe thinks differently than you. Yeah. But I think there's something else at play too. And I think there's something more sinister and I don't mean to go too far with this because it's a beer podcast. Well, I want to keep it fun and light a little bit, but I
don't think we need to keep it fun and light. I mean, the world is neither of those things right now.
Yeah. There's something about fundamentally that I've seen I don't see it so much when you're, and maybe this is a reason for hope, I don't see it so much when you're together face to face and talking with somebody about politics. Although I do think most people try and avoid politics now because it is so tense right now.
Yeah.
But when you're talking to folks online, and I've seen this and engaged in it, we have to get back to understanding what the terminology that we're actually arguing about or debating about, that can't be fungible. And what I see happening is that we don't even have a basis from which to start from, because words are, you probably know this, you could see this because this is what you do. You're a journalist. Words are so fungible and they mean different things. Mm-hmm. And if you try and lock those down, people become very uneasy with what those terms mean. And they almost like, well, that's not what it means to me. And then that's enough. Yeah. But if we can't come together with what we're actually talking about, I don't know how you can sit, even if you're sitting at a table, and across from somebody sharing a beer, how you can move the conversation or dialogue forward if we can't even agree on what, I'm not even going to use a word, but I'll just say, certain words mean. And I think that's a part that we've lost. And I don't know if that's an educational issue or if it's just I don't give a shit. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to learn about this stuff. Yeah. I'm so disenchanted with it. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It just means we're so disenchanted with this that we're not even going to bother to educate ourselves on it. So
there is an organization. So on the New Holland website, as I was doing some research beforehand, there's an organization called Samaritas that you're involved with. And I hope I'm pronouncing that the right way. But
you've nailed it. Yeah.
And when I was reading about their mission and, trying to really, I guess, be good Samaritans and good people, and without those sort of political mantras to it. And it kind of goes back to what you were saying before of, the system is broken and, politics isn't necessarily the answer. There's still community good that can be done, right? And you obviously care enough about that this is part of your bio, and that you've dedicated part of your life to actually working with organizations to try to do good and try to do better by the people who live and work around you. Is that a path forward to what breweries used to be, of the meeting places and the getting together? It's now not necessarily about politics, but it is just about, I don't know, making life better in your close little geographical footprint. I don't know if I'm phrasing this question the right way, but it's.
I think you're on to something with that, and I think it's something that you're bringing something that's happened very organically for me, because I was raised in a family, I don't mind saying I was raised in a very Christian family that had values regarding, tithing and giving back. And so this is something for me that is important to me, based on who I am and how I was raised. And it's I'm not an overtly religious person. But it's something down in my core that has been instilled in me. And I do think, Samaritas is a statewide organization that helps the most vulnerable and the people that are most in need in our communities, whether that be substance abuse, whether that be foster care families, kids that need foster care, and ultimately, hopefully, Lord willing, adoption if needed, or most, the first thing is to try and get them back with the family, but if not, ultimately they'll find their forever family, or whether it's new refugees that are coming in right now from Afghanistan. We're trying to help the most vulnerable people in our community. And I do think this is my wife and I have made a very large commitment financially to this organization. We believe in doing what we can with the gifts that we've been given, to try and stabilize our community, because there is great need out there. And maybe this is the way around the political side, even though I know many people within this organization would disagree with my politics. We can unite and come together where we see need. We may not come together and understand and how do I say, agree on the best way to help them, but we agree that we want to both help them. And this is a good place for us to put our energies then, where we can really see impact. And boy, I tell you, some of the stories that come out of this organization are absolutely amazing. They're phenomenal. And then people that come through this organizations that have been helped come back and they serve, within the staff of the organization, helping others. And so it does have this exponential impact. And it's a reason, certainly it's a reason for me for hope and overall well-being of our state's most vulnerable and our communities that we live in.
Yeah. You mentioned substance abuse as part of this, and that sort of jumped out to me when I was reading about the organization, because substance abuse is not something that gets talked about enough in and around the brewing space. And it certainly exists, and it's there. And, certainly if people, need help or see that people need help, it should be encouraged that they seek it out or try to help as best they can. But as the owner of a brewery, talking about substance abuse, is that a difficult conversation to have?
I don't find it difficult in terms of, hey, do you want to talk about substance abuse? Let's talk about it. But I do think the juxtaposition, so to speak, of someone that, makes products that are a problem for certain individuals.
Sure.
This I think does get back to more of my libertarian roots in terms of, look, every individual is different and we need to respect that. And this is a great, I'm sure I don't know how many conversations you have around this subject with other brewers, but there have been several individuals that have come through our organization that should never have, I shouldn't say it so definitively, that have certainly struggled with alcohol. And fortunately, in our case, most of them have, through, I think, some help and some conversations that we've been able to have with them, have mitigated the circumstances that they found themselves in. Now, I'm not going to say that they've all gone into 12-step recovery programs, but we've helped identify some challenges that people have had, and that maybe it's not a good idea that you work at a brewery and distillery.
Sure. Right.
I mean, I think that's look, you have to, I'm not saying you can't, but let's have a real honest conversation here. You have an addictive personality, say, okay, maybe let's let's look and help you find a spot that's, that where you're not around this for at least 8 hours a day. Now that's not everybody. Certain people have been able to be very disciplined and been able to overcome it, but others have not, and we've had to help them along the way. But as on a macro level, I do see the struggle. It's an internal struggle. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I don't struggle with it at times. I mean, it is. You can see a lot of the damage that is out there because of people's inability to control themselves around it, and it is a. I mean, I don't think there are people that are predisposed. I do think certain individuals are predisposed, either mentally or physically, to be set up for challenges if the right environment occurs. And, that's a challenge. And it's one that we need to face. But I do think we've tried the other way, right? We've tried the prohibition aspects on things, and we found that was a dismal failure. So
that didn't work.
That didn't work. We need to have these conversations though, and be open and vulnerable with each other, and to ensure the safety of our team members and even our communities that we work in.
I want to tie this back to what we were talking about in the beginning, which was your geological studies, and you mentioned focusing on groundwater, and the conversation in the beer space. I mean, and also just certainly in your state of Michigan and pretty much everywhere, is clean water and access to it and the importance of it. I realized that over the last couple of years, I've been talking with brewers more and more about, their water program and, whether or not, they're cleaning it before they're returning it back to the, to the sewer systems or beyond. But, the necessity for clean water, and certainly where you are out at the Great Lakes, that's a conversation that comes up quite a bit. What is something from your previous experience, job experience, and knowledge? What's a conversation about water that we're all not having that we should be?
Wow. I think here in Michigan we get really the politicalization around the water basin here is quite well. It's full of a lot of hyperbole, and I think the scale at which our ecosystem and our water system here in the Great Lakes operates is really unfathomable to the human mind. In the past 2 years, and I just was reading this article because our Great Lakes have gone down 17 inches in surface water. We were at an all-time high here in Michigan and the Great Lakes states here that touched Lake Michigan and Lake Huron. So that's Canada and Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, right? And well, not so much Ohio. They come in Lake Erie, but we were at an all-time high. And over the past 2 years, the water levels have declined 17 inches. And what that translates to is somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5 trillion gallons of water. And so when we start to think about water usage in terms of what a brewery like New Holland uses, that scale is it's infinitesimal compared to the overall loss of water that's just happened naturally through the Great Lakes Basin. And history shows you that this happens over and over again over the past 100, 150 years. These lakes have gone up and down tremendously like this. So I think scale is really important to be looking at, and the overall, and whether or not your water, like these beers, what is the actual volume that's leaving the actual basin as well, as part of the brewery's usage. So I think that's really important to look at. And I don't know that we're really talking about how much is actually leaving the actual basin, or whether it's getting put, even though we're using it for beer, is it getting putting right back into that drain, that ecosystem. And then in terms of, I think that New Holland is, we've had to work very closely, or we would like to have worked more closely with our wastewater treatment facility here locally. And I think that's a big frustration of mine, was the unwillingness of our local municipality to work with us. And it was more of we're going to use the stick mentality as opposed to work with you on what processes that we can do to mitigate. Mostly for us, it's BOD and COD down the drain. Mm-hmm. These aren't heavy toxins, but they tax the local municipality's ability to treat the water that's coming in. And I would like to, for me personally, and I don't know what is happening out within other local communities, but man, if you can work with your wastewater treatment plant on a partnership that you can grow, because at the end of the day, when you're starting, your job in your mind is to make great beer, right? And and find a market for that great beer.
Yeah.
And that's a Herculean task right off the bat. Your job isn't to think about, well, I'm also now going to be a water purifier, right? And I'm not saying you don't do that, but that's not your job. You're not setting out to be a water purification plant. And so what we've had to do is gradually grow our waste treatment. We've had to slowly do that on our own. And we've had to there's resources out there that you can find in the industry, but they're not cheap. And every brewery is a little bit different. Everybody's affluent's a little bit different. And so we've had to grow up our waste treatment plant alongside, independently of what our local municipality was doing, because it's almost like the more, if the local municipality has capacity, they're not really incentivized to tell us what to do, because we have to pay for what we put down the drain. Therefore, they get more revenue. And so the system isn't really set up. You have to have really good people then at your local municipality that really, out of the goodness of their heart, want to work with you for what's best for the brewery, the community, and the water, the end, where you're going to discharge the water. Yeah. And that alignment doesn't always happen. As the intensity around climate change, whether you believe in it or not, becomes more and more, this issue is going to continue to become more and more front and center, especially as breweries move up past the 5,000 barrel mark. All of a sudden you start to become on the radar. I'm being general here. And depending on the attitude of your local municipality, it can really slow your growth down or be very costly and take your attention off of what it is you really do well.
Yeah. It just strikes me that this is, you were saying, brewers have the one job of making, really good beer when they first start. More and more I'm hearing that this is, part of the conversation from day one that they need to be having as well. And I think it's only going to become a little bit more intense as all these situations grow.
I think you're right. And I think the one thing one can do, and this is just if you're building your brewery and you have the space to put in a large holding balancing tank, that right there will help, because I couldn't have this more perfectly. My office sits right across from our waste treatment. I'm looking at our waste treatment plant right now, and there is a tanker there that takes our tank bottles.
I feel like as the CEO, you probably could have gotten better accommodations. Or is this by choice?
It is by choice. I like being it's one part of me that I think, the shift from brewing every batch of beer for the first 5 years to becoming CEO and growing your organization has been it's a difficult transition for me, because I like to keep my hands on things. And so, but the challenge has changed now. Now it's growing a really healthy and strong culture within our organization, but I still like being close to the action. But if you put in, I was saying, just to a startup brewer, if you can put a tank in that has a bottom that's sloped, and it's a large enough tank that you can capture a day or two of your effluent that are coming through your processes, now you can adjust and buffer your water accordingly and keep a lot of those BOD and CODs, out of the system, and you can actually pay a farmer or somebody to come take those, or a digester to come take those and actually create something from it. Now it's I mean, that in itself is another system that's running and operating amongst your brewery. But if you can have the foresight to even, that would be step one. You'll be ahead of the game.
Yeah. Well, hopefully,
I know
yeah.
Wastewater. I mean, that's what we ended up talking about.
I think it's important though. This is, it's not always about just the fun stuff, or this is how beer has evolved.
You're right. You're right. And we have to do it, and we have to do it better than what we've done in the past. Historically speaking.
Yeah.
I'm talking the long arc here. I'm talking about, when there was a stream behind the brewery, and then you just dumped it all back into the stream and off it went. We're not doing that anymore.
No, that's probably a good thing as well. And
yes,
what you're saving on the fines that you were getting is probably pretty good as well. So,
by the way, I want to clarify. I'm talking about hundreds of years ago. We never did that. Truly.
No, you're right. But there is an evolution, and, to sort of tie it back to everything, I appreciate you taking the time on the show just to sort of talk about how your brewery has evolved, from the beginning. And I mean, there's so much more that we can get into, and I hope you'll come back down the line, and we can keep this going. But for now, I'll say thanks for being on the show this week. I really appreciate it. Who do you want to hear from on the show? Who in and around the beer space would be great to talk with? Let me know. We're on social media at The Beer Edge, and you can always reach me on email at John Hall, that's JOHNHOLL at beeredge.com, or I'm on Twitter at John_Hall. And if you love smoked beers, and of course you do, a reminder to check out the This Week in Rauch Beer group on Facebook, or you can follow along on Twitter and Instagram at TW Rauch Beer. And if you're interested in advertising, please reach out to Liz Melby. She's at liz@beeredge.com, and she'll let you know all of the information. And speaking of that, this episode was made possible by the support of Briess, which has been malting barley for 145 years. And the fifth generation of family ownership is currently leading the company. But the values have always remained the same, producing the highest quality, most consistent malt, and working directly with their customers to help them succeed. From pilsners to porters and everything in between, Briess offers the finest handcrafted malts, extracts, and adjuncts to help you brew the perfect beer. And we're also brought to you by NZ Hops. In a little country far down in the Pacific, you'll find a cooperative of master growers whose legend and cultivars have been crafted for over 150 years with creativity and passion to produce some of the world's finest hops. Years of partnership with dedicated hop breeding programs and farming knowledge handed down through the generations sees the current day master growers proudly providing 18 unique New Zealand hop varieties to the world. Visit nzhops.co.nz or find them on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn at nzhopsltd to learn more. All right, as I promised earlier, Jack Hendler is back with us. Jack's Abbey is a sponsor of this episode, so I hope you'll give them a closer look. And we're talking about the Lagers of the World Series and Destination Japan. It's available now. And Jack, you're 3 into this series. What have you been learning about lagers as you've been going along with this program?
One of the great things that we've learned is how much passion and interest there is in craft lagers all around the world, and not just in your standard types of lagers, but some really interesting, innovative beers. And we're really excited to bring that passion, that inspiration from all over the world back to Framingham and be able to introduce these beers.
I'm curious about lagers as a canvas for other flavors. Has this sort of gotten you out of your comfort zone a little bit?
No, this is exactly what we enjoy doing. It's always from the beginning of the brewery been important to expand people's ideas around what a lager is, whether that's a hoppy beer, whether that's a barrel-aged beer, whether that's a spice beer. There's a lot of great flavors and unique things you can do brewing lager beer. And it's one of the great things that we found while we're working with all these breweries from around the world, is that other breweries, other countries are really understanding this as well. And we're really excited to be part of this community of craft brewers that wants to highlight lager brewing.
One more time, can you give us some of the details on Destination Japan?
Absolutely. So Destination Japan, it's a collaboration with Baird Brewing, for which we use rice, green tea, yuzu and Sriracha Ace hops. It's a really citrusy, hoppy beer, but at the same time, light, easy drinking, refreshing. So kind of the best of both worlds for lager brewing and unique flavors for brewing great craft beer.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jack. And I'm going to remind everybody to check out jacksabbey.com to learn more, even more about this beer, as well as all of the other lagers that the brewery has on offer. And again, thanks to the brewery for being a sponsor of this episode. And one last reminder to go to beeredge.com to see all that we have going on and to check out the Beer Edge podcast hosted by Andy Crouch. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast drops new episodes on the 15th of every month. As for this show, Nate Schweber, he does the music, Jeff Quinn designed the logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.